Hey there, boys and girls. Another day, another daily read aloud coming at ya. And for today, I actually picked a story that I read every year to my class because I think it's just one of those books that, it never goes bad. It's an absolute classic. I think everyone should read it at least once. And it's different. There's so many books that tell the same story, just different versions for the most part. But I think, kind of like movies nowadays, but I think this one is one that's completely original. I don't know who in the world, other than this author, could have thought it up. So, today's story, Flat Stanley. And I love this book, and it actually reminds me of one of the kids in my class because we have a Stanley in my class. So, Stanley, this one's for you today, pal. So this is Flat Stanley. As you can tell, our hero of the story is, well, flat. Last week we talked about 3D shapes, and we know as people, we are 3D, right? We look like we're popping out at you. But when it comes to our friend Flat Stanley, not quite. He fits in more with like letters in the mail and doormats than he does people, because he is completely flat. He stands side to side and he's just like that. So we're going to learn a little bit about Flat Stanley and how he ended up that way. Alright, Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown. Pictures by Scott Nash. Let's see what's going on with Flat Stanley. Hey, come and look, Arthur Lambchop called from the bedroom he shared with his brother Stanley. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop cared greatly for politeness and correct speech. Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people, said Mrs. Lambchop. But look, said Arthur, pointing. I wonder what could be going on. So we have a little boy named Arthur and his parents, and he wants them to look at something. We just don't know what yet. Across Stanley's bed lay the enormous bulletin board. It had fallen on Stanley during the night. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed, but Stanley wasn't hurt. What's going on here? He said, cheerfully sitting up. Heavens! Cried Mrs. Lambchop. Gosh, said Arthur. Stanley's flat! As a pancake, said Mr. Lambchop. Darndest thing I've ever seen. Mrs. Lambchop sighed and said, Let's all have breakfast. Then we'll hear what Dr. Dan has to say. So unfortunately, a bulletin board fell on top of Stanley. Thank goodness he's not hurt. This actually kind of reminds me of the story we read a couple weeks ago, Bad Case of the Stripes, right? Camilla woke up and all of a sudden she was just covered in stripes and she didn't understand why. Poor Stanley woke up and he's flat. It's very unfortunate. In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley. How do you feel? He asked. I felt sort of tickly after I got up, Stanley said, but I feel fine now. Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases, said Dr. Dan. The nurses took Stanley's measurements. He was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and a half an inch thick. We are not a half an inch thick. If you look at our bodies, we're all different shapes and sizes as you go throughout your body. Poor Stanley is completely flat. See how that would be concerning. Being flat could be fun. Stanley enjoyed going in and out of the rooms by sliding through the crack at the bottom of the door. Arthur tried too, but he just banged his head. Being flat could be exciting. During the holidays, Stanley was invited to visit his friend Thomas in California. Mr. Lambchop brought home an enormous brown paper envelope and said, Stanley, try this on for size. The envelope fit Stanley perfectly, and the next morning his parents slid him in it along with an egg salad sandwich, and mailed him from the box on the corner. So he's figuring out that being flat's not all a bad thing, right? Some people might look at it like, oh my gosh, I don't look normal. But Stanley's finding ways to make it exciting and fun, right? Sliding under doors, getting mail to his friend. Saves for a plane ticket, right? Pretty cool. Stanley had a fine time in California. There he is sunbathing. He's as flat as the towel. He's still getting ice cream, sitting in the car, and he's a surfboard. Pretty cool. Thomas's family returned him in a beautiful white envelope they had made themselves. They marked it airmail and wrote valuable and this end up on both sides. Looks like Stanley enjoyed his vacation. In the park one Sunday afternoon, Stanley and Arthur watched some boys flying big kites. Someday, Arthur said, I would like to have a big kite. You can fly me, Arthur. Come on, Stanley said. He gave Arthur a spool of string and attached the string to himself. Then he ran across the grass to catch the wind. Up, up, up went Stanley. Arthur let out all the string and Stanley soared high above the trees. Everyone stood still to watch. Pretty fantastic. Could you imagine being a kite? It'd be so cool. You could see all sorts of things. But Arthur got tired of running with the empty spool. Wedging it into the fork of a tree, he went off for a hot dog. He didn't notice when Stanley became tangled in the branches of the tree. Half an hour passed before Arthur heard Stanley's shouts and climbed up to set him free. Arthur apologized over and over again that evening, but Stanley was still cross. Cross means upset. Poor Stanley got stuck in the tree. So maybe being a kite's not the best idea, right? Unless you have somebody who's going to pay attention to you. Unfortunately, Arthur was not the one. The next morning, Mr. Lambchop and Stanley met their neighbor, Mr. O.J. Dart, director of the famous Museum of Art. Mr. Dart looked worried. Another valuable painting was stolen from the famous museum last night, he told Stanley and his father. The police suspect a gang of sneaky thieves. They work at night by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. Stanley had an idea. He explained it to Mr. Dart. Excellent, said Mr. Dart. We'll try out your plan tonight. I wonder what their plan is. I wonder how Stanley can help a famous art director from all the art getting stolen. He has some sort of idea. We'll have to wait and see. That evening in the main hall of the museum, Mr. Dart showed Stanley the most expensive painting in the world. Next to it was an empty picture frame. And now, Stanley, said Mr. Dart, it's time for your disguise. Stanley showed Mr. Dart the disguise he had brought. This is a really good one, my cowboy hat, and a red bandana. I'm sorry, Mr. Dart said, but we don't have any cowboy pictures here. You must wear this disguise I have chosen. Stanley could hardly speak when he saw Mr. Dart's disguise. It looks like a girl, he protested. But Stanley was a good sport, so he put it on. So Stanley's objective is to prevent the sneaky thieves from stealing any of the art. And for him to do that, he's going to wear a costume to hide inside a painting. They'll never suspect he's there. I think he wanted to wear that cowboy outfit a little more than he wanted to wear the little Bo Peep one. Yikes! In the main hall, Stanley climbed into the empty picture frame and stood very still. Very nice, said Mr. Dart, and went off to arrange the rest of their plan. Now, Stanley was alone. The hall was very dark, but enough moonlight came through the windows for him to see the world's most expensive expensive painting. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come, he thought. Then, creak! A glow of yellow light shone suddenly in the center of the hall. A trap door had opened in the floor. The sneak thieves, carrying lanterns, came up in the hall. Yikes, so they're there. I wonder what Stanley's going to do. The thieves took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. "This is it, Max," said the first thief, whose name was Luther. "In all of this great city, there is no one to suspect us." Then Luther saw Stanley in his frame. "I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, Max," he said. "This one looks scared." Stanley managed a tiny smile. "She is smiling." "Sort of," Max said. "And what a pretty little thing she is, too." That made Stanley furious. In his loudest voice, he shouted, "Police! Mr. Dart! The sneak thieves are here!" I hope he catches them. It was a brilliant plan. Super smart. "Max," Luther whispered, "I thought I heard the sheep girl yell." "Oh boy, yelling pictures? We both need a rest," Max whispered back. "You'll get a rest all right," shouted Mr. Dart, rushing in with lots of policemen. "You'll get arrested." That's what. I think he was trying to make a joke. It wasn't very funny. The sneak thieves were quickly handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning, Stanley Lambchop got a medal from the chief of police. The day after that, his picture was in all the newspapers. Wow, that was pretty brave. For a while, Stanley was famous. People would point him out and whisper, "Over there, Agnes, Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the museum robbers," and things like that. But then people began to make fun of him. "Hi, Super Skinny," they would call. That's not nice. See people turning their nose up at him and talking about him, making faces at him. That's not nice at all. Whispering. Where in just the other picture, they were talking and cheering him on. You can tell how different he feels, right? Super happy. Everybody's happy and loves him, thinks he's great. Now they're kind of picking on him and being bullies. Late one night, Arthur woke to the sound of Stanley crying. "What's wrong?" he said. Stanley sighed. "I want to be a regular sheep again, like other people. It's not fair." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." And then Arthur had an idea. He turned on the light and ran to the big toy box in the corner. He tossed aside toy soldiers, airplanes, and boat models. "Got it," he said, holding up a bicycle pump. Typically, with a bicycle pump, you use that to put air in your tires if your tires are flat. I'm wondering what Arthur is going to try to do with it to cheer Stanley up. Maybe they'll go for a bike ride. I don't know. "Okay," Stanley said after a moment, "but take it easy." He stood with the end of the hose in his mouth, clamping his lips tightly so no air could escape. Arthur began to pump. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hands," he said. Stanley's top half began to swell and started to get bigger and puffier. Stanley got bigger and bigger. His pajama buttons burst off. Pop, pop, pop. I did not expect that to happen. So they're trying to blow him up. Not blow him up as in like into a lot of pieces, but blow him up as in like inflate him like you would a bike tire, right? You put enough air in it so it's nice and hard and solid so that you can ride on it. If it's flat, you can't. So he's trying to blow it up like Stanley. Soon he was all rounded out except for his right foot. He shook the foot twice and swelled to match the other one. There stood Stanley Lambtrap, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." Mr. and Mrs. Lambtrap came in to see what the boys were up to so late last night. "George," said Mrs. Lambtrap, "Stanley's round again." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Mrs. Lambtrap made hot chocolate to celebrate, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. Tongue twister. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambtrap tucked the brothers back into bed and turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Arthur and Stanley. Very soon, all the Lambtraps were asleep. The end. And I like that they start and end the book with a picture of Stanley's bulletin board. So if you look at his bulletin board from the beginning of the story, it's just like things he likes, sports, ribbons he's won, pictures he's drawn, his family, and then when you flip to the back, it's after he was flat, right? He drew all these pictures of himself, be doing things while he was flat. His family's still there, and there's still some other things, but there's the newspaper that he was in for helping save the art. So his life changed quite a bit, right? The end. I love this story because I think it's so creative, it's so imaginative, and to think about being flat, all the things you could do, right? I think the possibilities are endless. So for your book challenge today, I actually have a very fun one for you. Typically, when we're in school, I like to do the Flat Stanley Challenge, where we create a Flat Stanley and we send it to somewhere in the world. And then they get to send it to somewhere else, and we try to track to see where it's going and see all the different places Stanley can visit. Because of this year, and us not being able to do a project like that, instead, I'm going to have you come up with a place that you would want Stanley to visit. If you were Stanley, or if you were flat, where in the world would you want to be sent to? He got sent to California to go visit a friend. But maybe you would want to go to the beach. Somewhere, maybe Disney World. I would love to go to Disney World. Maybe you'd want to go to China. Maybe you'd want to go to Australia, go see a kangaroo. I don't know. Tell me where you would want to go and why. Because Stanley being flat, that's really cool. You can just get shipped in the mail for 50 cents for a stamp, right? Whereas, well, not right now, but typically when you go to travel places, you have to pay a lot of money for a seat on a plane or on a boat, or even to drive a car. It takes a lot of money to drive from one place to another. So think about it. Where would you want to go if you were flat? I think it's pretty clever. So tell me about your place and why, and I hope you guys really enjoyed this story. I love Flat Stanley, and if you love Flat Stanley as much as I do, I'll let you guys in on a little secret. There's also these really cool like series books about Flat Stanley and all the adventures he goes on. He looks a little different in those stories, but they're great for emergent readers. So our friends that are starting to, become really good readers in our class and heading into first grade, if you like Flat Stanley's story, there's a ton of really good readers that we can get you guys hooked up with so that you can read some more about our friend Flat Stanley. Sound good? All right. Enjoy the rest of your day and can't wait to hear where you're going to go. Lots of different places. Let's keep reading together. Bye, guys!